Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening session. It gives me great pleasure to be on a panel with Janice, Jeet, and Srinath. It's a very diverse panel, and I think that's one of the things we're going to be addressing as we go forward over the next hour or so. The theme, the name of the panel is The Voices Within, and we're supposed to be talking about different genres of writing, of imagining. And I think from our discussions that we had yesterday and just now, we also want to sort of problematize that a little bit to say, okay, what is this whole thing about genre, and can we get beyond it? And can we start talking about the moment of writing as an act in itself and as a fact in itself, not, and that determines what form, what mode, what texture, that is going to emerge. And often the creators may or may not know where that's going, or may think it's going somewhere and it goes somewhere else, and it becomes something else. I think Jeet is going to share something, share some bits of poetry which become various things over time. And this whole creative process of making something, of imagining something, of bringing something into being is a process of discovery for the artist, and it's not just a process of discovery for the reader when it becomes something that you put on the table or put on Kindle or whatever. So these moments of discovery as we're creating, as we go through this process that is constantly delighting us as artists, is basically what we would like to be talking about. But my first question to the three of you, very briefly, would be to sort of, if we were to address this word genre, what would your response to that be? And then we go forward from that. Who wants to take that?
I hate to go first, but in any case, I've always had a problem with the idea of genre because whether it's poetry or fiction or non-fiction, words, ideas, images bleed across the genres, and I think your obsessions stay the same. And I think it's obsessions that we're trying to work out through the act of writing, and ideas that stay with you your entire life, and you may put them in different forms, but it's a handful of ideas or thoughts or passions. So whatever the genre might be, it's the same person who's doing the writing, and it absolutely bleeds. And in my case, I plagiarize. The songs plagiarize from the poems, from the prose. And since I'm not going to sue myself, I think that's allowed. You
know? Srinath, Janice, who wants to go?
So I think of conventions mostly when you say the word genre. And most recently, this has cropped up for me with respect to my work in translation, because what you call literary fiction, say in English, the conventions are not shared in Kannada. And this becomes a problem when editors come across the work, because you're supposed to have a certain kind of reticence when you do fiction in English. There are all kinds of conventions in English language publishing about repeating words, for example. If you have the same word repeated within 3 or 4 sentences of each other, there are editors who swoop down on this. And this is simply not there in Kannada. So one of the things I've had to do is reconcile the ambiguities of genre between 2 languages. And that has expanded my mind in terms of thinking of genre and exploding it to some extent, really.
I think my problem with genre is that it sets out to do exactly what has been done for centuries and centuries, especially, imposed specifically more from the Western world, that, there are certain genres that are more fitting for a woman to write in, for example, and more fitting for a man to write in. Yeah. What do these really mean? There are certain genres, as Srinath was saying, that don't even exist in other languages. And so, as all categories go, I'm quite happy to complicate the idea of genre always. I think this book that I'm holding in my hand tries to do exactly that. And I think what I'm also interested in, because of where I come from, which is Shillong, which is in Meghalaya, the Khasi Hills, I'm interested in the spoken and the textual as well. So, how do these speak with each other? How do they resonate with each other? How do they bleed into each other? And then when we speak of the spoken and the text, we think of songs, we think of poetry, and so those are much larger umbrellas and more embracing, I think, and more accommodating of perhaps what we do.
So that's, I just want to, before I ask you to read from the book, I just want to pick out this idea of bleeding across, and the word bleed as sort of almost a physical process. And the fact that both of you were talking about obsessions that stay the same, regardless of what work you're actually writing. Ambiguities that we have to deal with between languages or between genres or between one work and the next. Coming to this, the oral nature of so much of how we live our lives in this country, historically speaking, not just in the Northeast, but everywhere. I'm coming from a background of classical dance. It's so much an oral tradition. And the nature of oral tradition means that it's not written down, so change is built into it in a sense, in the process of transfer. And that, I think, is, once you write it down, how does one capture that sense of change inbuilt into the act of telling a story? So I think these are the questions that we can maybe unpack a little. But first, Janice, would you like to read from?
So, three little things.
Can we turn Janice's mic up a little bit, please? Thank you.
Speak quite softly to begin with. And my throat is a bit sore, to be honest, but I will try and speak a little louder. Is that better? Okay. So three little excerpts from the same book, and one of them is a song, one of them is a poem, and one of them is something that begins the book, and I don't really have a name for it. Here's the song. What do they know? What do they know? Where do they go? Where do they go? The ones who walk come like April showers and mad March flowers, fleet of foot and light as leaves, tripping, tripping with the breeze. The oldest of our tribes, some say, around since the earliest days, when man and animal would praise the young moon and the sun. When the ding-a, the tree that carries all trees, was no more than a sapling. The walkers, our oldest tribe, no hill too high for their grappling. Shadow people who come and go like the wind, like the wind. The ones who walk are the old ones, unbound by forest or land, moving through the ages still, through all the days of man. As villages rose and villages fell, the Nongyad washed by rain, darkened by the sun, except one, a woman white as frost, they say, a woman white as frost on a cold, clear winter's day, they say with eyes the color of winter skies, from far away, from far away. Oh, did she walk along beside the ancient walkers? What do we know? What do we know? How many come? How many go? The walkers cannot tell us now. They're long locked up in cages. The forest emptied, the hills untrodden. Their endless winter rages. They wept to be enclosed by walls and refused to sleep inside them, for fear that they would die if upon waking they did not see the sky. Thank you. The very small poem is from the middle of the book. Yes, it's a novel and it has an entire narrative in lyric. It's called Baptism. When you meet with a new plant, never observed before, do not touch it immediately. Observe how the flowers are not yet in bloom, but appear within a few days of coming to perfection. Now open a few, finding them papillinaceous. The tip of the standard, as well as of the keel, has a purplish hue. The whole habit of the plant shows it to be an astragalus. For the present time, call it Liquiritia minor. Nomina si nescis, pardon my Latin, si nescis perit cognito rerum. Only after is it named, is a thing known. And the last little excerpt is from right at the beginning of the book, which possibly we might want to label the prologue, but I would prefer to call this the voices of the earth and the songs of community. Let us wait. Let us listen. We tell this story often, and in the telling, it is different every time. But that, you see, is the nature of stories. There is always a tree, always a tiger, always a small bird that knows the secrets of the forest and helps humankind. The rest is smoke that never curls the same way twice. We tell this story around a hearth. Come, gather by the fire. What will it be tonight? A tale of moral caution, say the elders, of reaching too far, too high. But the children plead for something lighter, where giants turn into mountains and their baskets into boulders. No, say the lovers, tell us about the man who played the flute amidst the branches, so sweet and so clear, and won the heart of the queen. Tonight, we tell the tale of creation, the one in which a tree is a golden ladder linking earth to sky. Why, ask the children, why? So that the first tribes of our celestial people could wander freely, working their fields below until the evening, climbing up to rest in the house of God at night. Listen now to how the tree, the tallest in the world tree, was felled. How 7 tribes were rendered earthbound, how its branches smacked the lands of the south, laying them flat and rich with the mulch of foliage. How the trunk crashed and carved our hills. Look how they bear the mark through all the ages still. Listen, listen, for a story told once may not be told again.
Thank you so much, Janice. There's so much already there that I think you've opened up from our first remarks. The 3 different genres, though I don't want to return to that word, modes maybe, which is the word you suggested yesterday. The song, the poem, and something that is uncategorized, which is actually, and then you say only after it is named is the thing known. So then there's that tension between, always that tension between when does something become something. And this image of smoke never curling the same way twice, which talking about oral narratives and how you tell a story the next time. The story may remain the same, as Jeet was saying, the person who's writing is the same, but it's not the same because, yeah, the telling is very different. Do the 2 of you have any responses, any questions for Janice?
I think the lines that resonate or should resonate are the last couple of lines. Once this story is told, it will not be told again because the things that we're destroying will never come back.
I'm curious about language, as in what language do you conceive these songs and poems in? And
that's such a good question, and out of some sort of post-colonial guilt, I wish I could say that I think in Khasi, which is the language of the Khasi Hills, and I wish I could say that I conceive of all of these stories and songs and poems somewhere originally, nascently in Khasi, but that is not the case. I've had a convent education, I've studied outside, and you know, Khasi has been written out of me in a lot of ways, but only now, I think, has the journey become one of return. And while I cannot write in Khasi, I borrow extendedly its rhythmic musicality, how it sounds to the ear, because Khasi was pretty much an oral language without a script for so long. There is an immense and profound focus on rhythm. So it sounds like poetry a lot of the times, and that's what I try and harness. Thank you for asking that.
No, I asked it because the rhythms were evident when you were reading those out. Yeah.
We will have some time for questions right at the end, so keep them handy. Jeet?
I'm going to read a song, or the lyrics of a song, which came out of a poem called Aquatic from my collection, These Errors Are Correct. And I'm picking this because it ties into your reading, Janice's reading. It imagines a world in which the inevitable changes brought about by the warming of the planet are already too late to reverse, and what might happen. And so that's what... I won't read the original poem that led to this song because it's quite similar. I'll read the lyrics of the song, and then I'll read a poem that plagiarizes one of the lines of the song and creates a poem around it. And it's collaboration with an Australian poet by the name of Pascal Burton for a collection. And then I will read a little section from Names of the Women that also talks about the end of the world as we have wrought it. This is called The Future is Water. Who will speak to the fish in their shiver? They've heard your lie before, that a river runs under the river. Movement is bliss, a kiss their claim. They visit your room and stay up to dream on their side of the glass. Entranced by your color in the kitchen lights, they hang, breathing with their mouths, they hang, speaking of the gorgeous life, the glisten. Suspended in the supreme element, they murmur your name as the days turn warmer, colder, stranger. Your 1,000 names recited in pairs follow one on one like the stairs to the high surface of the water, where it's hot or it's hotter, where everything floats and smells, and you'll need a new set of skills: vigilance, silence, gills. So the line from this song that I plagiarized for the poem that I'm going to read is, they murmur your name as the days turn warmer. This is called 7-Year Season. I whisper your name and the day turns warm. A third-quarter moon holds the father of Jupiter in place. Farther than ever, slower and meaner, through space, disappearing, simmering. The day turns and I whisper your name, your 1,000-maned name, so terrible and rare. In rain and in sun, I cup its flame, better than thinking, better than prayer. Jupiter's father holds the moon in thrall. You know what comes next. One by one, the days will wobble and fall. This is the hexed season. Slower and meaner, disappearing in space. The world spins in circles. The worm knows when to show her face. Well done, she says. Good form. We disappear. We simmer. The day turns from doom to doom. In the fall, I may remember to whisper your name, to summon the worm. Thank you. So this is from a book called The Names of the Women, which reimagines the New Testament in the voices of 15 women from the New Testament. And it's interspersed with sections spoken in the first person by Christ on the cross, which I know is a bit of a egotistical sort of thing to attempt, but hey, this is what writers do. We pretend to be God. Tell them the day comes that will burn as an oven. Write, Mary, that the monuments they raise will be heaps of broken stone, and the flood will come again. And even as the days to come will burn you, even as the last bird in the last sky burns, even in the days of burning, so shall you drown, and no ark may hold you from the whiteness that floats upon the earth as a kiss in a poisoned chalice. The burning flood that leaves neither root nor branch, neither sweet fruit nor green leaf, neither air to breathe nor light in the sky, and to the mighty that raise their monuments to the heavens, I say, woe unto you, and woe to your city that is exalted unto heaven, for it will be brought to hell. Woe to you whose flight is in winter, and woe if you flee in the summer. Woe be thy name, woe is thy reward and true birthright, for when the end begins, you shall be first brought down. You shall be first among the beguiled, you, the well-spoken, the wealthy, the greed-hungry, who will flock together in fear, and some will come in my name and praise the Father, but believe them not, for they do the work of Satan while speaking the word of the Lord in their white vestments and their gibberish and their temples of money. Tell them they shall be brought down, and for all that they seduce you to war, they shall be brought down, and for all that they use the word of false gods, they shall be brought down, and for all that they say, pitting one tribe against another, high against low, tell them they shall be brought down, and those that take sides for one color against another, the brawlers with the yellow hair, the one whose horses are many, the one who bathes in the blood of the murdered, the one who sings with the tongue of the hateful, they shall be brought down. And the time will come when nations of migrants will rise against nations of migrants, when brother will betray brother, and the father will betray the son, and the child will betray the parent, when friends are slain for water, and the oiled voice of he who trades in fear will be heard above all others. But your voice too shall be heard in the courts of men, Mary, inside the moving air, and on the byways where rumors live, in the north where ice melts, the sick sap of ages, and in the south where fires rage among the living and the dead. And when that time is come, do not fear what must be done. Let your heart lead your voice, lead your fist, and the hours yours. For that is the day of burning and water. And he that is on the housetop should not go into the house or enter therein. And if you are in the field, do not turn back to your house to collect your belongings, for your belongings are no longer yours, as your children are no longer yours. And the day is come when you will say, blessed is the womb that cannot bear, and blessed the breast that cannot give suck. For these are the days of affliction, and this is the time of dread, when lamentation is upon the land. And she who has eyes to read will understand my words 200 or 2,000 years from me. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jeet. I had a question, which I will ask, but after that last piece, I'm just also you started with a song, and this last piece, which is not written as a song, again going back to genre, but it reminded me in many ways of, I don't know, some portions of it, of 60s music, which is, I don't to call it protest music or to call it gospel music, or that sort of, it has that, yeah, exactly, that sort of, you know, there is, it exhilarates and it warns at the same time, which is sort of, again, playing between these contradictions. And again, the speaking of contradictions, the title of the first book, These Errors Are Correct, and that those tensions that, again, that you were setting up with, do you name something or do you not name something? But I'll hand over to Srinath and Janice also to respond. But I had one question about that line that from the song becomes a poem. If you could just talk to us a little bit about how that happened, why that line, when, and you know, what was the process of that infection, a little bit.
Well, when I started to use the poem in this song with this band called HMT, and we performed in Calcutta this time last year, actually. We performed that piece. The line that resonated in terms of the context of the music was, I murmur your name as the days turn warmer. And the two other members of the band would stretch that line out. And so I repeated it. And then I heard it in a way that I hadn't heard it when I wrote it. And I kind of saw possibilities in it that I hadn't envisioned when I wrote it. And so when we performed it, I would repeat the line. And I would come back to it at the end. And every once in a while, when we were doing the improvising bit of it, I would say the line. And so when this collaboration happened, I had no idea how to start, and I had to do the first line, and I had no idea how to start, so I just thought I would steal from myself, and I changed the line a little bit.
Clearly it's a line that stayed with you, you know, for many reasons, I'm sure, but also because it has this wonderful sound.
Yeah.
And sound is such a large part of your writing, you know, how words, you know, they lie on a page and they look so distant from us, but they are breath.
Sure.
You know, they are sound at the heart of it, and their music.
Yeah.
And I loved how all the three excerpts that you shared, the song, the poem, and the excerpt that you shared with us just seemed indistinguishable somehow. They bled one into the other, and
Thank you.
I wouldn't want to pick out which one was a song and a poem. It doesn't matter by the end of it. But I had a very sort of, possibly very basic question, but only because I'm really, really interested, and I'm hoping the audience is as well. Do you read your work out loud after you write it? Is that part of the process? Because rhythm and pacing is so important in poetry, of course, but even in your fiction. And I'm just wondering how you incorporate sound and how words fall on a page in your writing process.
Thank you for that. No, I absolutely use sound. When I'm writing it, I'm hearing it in my head. But then after I write and rewrite and revise a passage, I do read it aloud, and particularly in this book, because rhythm is a part of this book. And I think that's actually a very useful thing to do, even with other kinds of writing, even with nonfiction, if you have dialogue. So important to read it out so you get a sense of how it sounds. And in fact, when you read it out, you edit it. You change the bits that don't quite fit in the mouth, and you know it's wrong. And
it doesn't quite follow your breath. You know, it puts your breath a little out of pace, and unless you're doing that very deliberately with a piece of writing, you know that you need to shorten a syllable or lengthen a syllable.
Yeah. which is something poets have been doing forever.
When you were reading from Names of the Women, I was reminded of Vikram's first question about genre. And because, again, as Janice pointed out, the rhythms are so distinct that how do you think about the difference between prose and poetry, since you do both of them?
I honestly don't think there's a difference. I just think the form is different, and there are some pieces of writing where the form is so important, in a poem, for example, where the form is so important that it almost determines the words. A very strict form like a canzone or a sestina, very kind of fiercely regimented kind of form, which allows no leeway or looseness, it sometimes determines the content. So when you're writing like that, it really is sound and that you're aiming for. And of course, you have to fix it eventually so that the sense is correct as well. And I think when you do that enough, really it makes no difference whether there's a formal schemata there or it's text that goes from left to right as prose does. And really the only difference is poetry is prose cut up into lines of different sizes.
Yeah, no, it's true. And maybe the moments of resolution obviously vary, because with a poem, unless you're writing an epic poem, which one day I hope you will, Jeet, your moments of resolution come at, yes, exactly.
Srinath, going on to you.
Listening to Janice and Jeet read out poetry and song, it took me back to probably the first writing I did, the first arrival of summoning words to describe the world, and this was again because of music. When I was a teenager and we would listen to, Western music, and this was pre-internet, and we didn't know the lyrics, and so there were raging discussions about what, Kurt Cobain was actually saying or so on. And we'd come back the next day, all excited with something written up, saying, look here, I cracked this, I have this. And even now that I'm better with accents, I listen to a song and said, oh no, I got it wrong. It was completely something else. But the thing is, you still have to make something coherent of it. And the creative act of putting words to the world in some way, I think music and poetry, they have a great deal to do with it, and these things all, as Vikram might say, bleed into one another. So one of the things I've done with form in my writing is, I have these impulses. One of them is travel. For some reason, I need to go to a place to figure out what's going on. And I've managed to make travel a part of my writing almost no matter what I'm writing about. Even when it comes to books, I've managed to include travel in it. I write about science, I write about various things. And so I'm going to read out, and one of the other impulses is this sense of in-betweenness, what one of my friends called authenticity issues, which Janice also referred to some time back with respect to Khasi and so on. And so some time ago I was in Himachal Pradesh, living in Manali, and this is an essay I wrote after that. It's called The Dog That Bit Only Foreigners. In a village on the side of a hill in Himachal's Parvati Valley lived a dog that bit only foreigners. Its instinct for national boundaries was so acute, I was told, that the week before I arrived, it even bit 2 Nepali construction workers. I was traveling with 2 far more flagrant foreigners. Peter, an apple-stealing German who spent his days as a serial tourist in South Asian countries, and Leo, a foggily good-natured Dutchman in his 60s who had gone relatively clean after having to be rebooted twice from heroin overdoses. I was a rare Indian tourist there. I had come from Manali, where I was living for a few months, trying to write about my childhood, a period so beset by conflicting identities that I hoped the neutral vantage of tourist India might help me get on with it. I'd grown up in Bangalore, speaking one dialect of Kannada at home, another outside, and neither at school, where we were fined for speaking anything other than English. But my first language at school was Hindi. The rhymes I learned, the books I read as a child were in English. usually set in the UK, sometimes in the US. For a while, I hung out with the kids who met in an empty plot on the street behind my house, but I was impervious to the charms of kabaddi and kho-kho. They thought I was a poser, and I thought their flared khaki shorts ridiculous, even though I wore muted saffron trousers to my Hindu convent school. Later, I was in a rock band, singing in accents I couldn't speak in. And I was in the NCC, where I did solemnly pledge to always uphold the unity of India. The dog in the village, obviously beholden to some sort of canine nationalist pledge, made an attempt on Leo almost immediately. He returned from a walk with a torn jeans leg, astounded that such diabolism should exist in the world. The dog had emerged from an alcove near the entrance of the village and gone for his ankle without warning. Dry stone walls on either side made the passage perfect for ambush. Leo recounted that while he struggled to break away, laughing faces had appeared at windows and balconies. He carried a stick and stone in either hand for the remainder of our stay. Peter began to plan his apple orchard raids in the opposite direction, and I was filled with apprehension. What if the dog bit me? Worse than the bite, what would it say about my Indianness? India, we are often told, lives in our villages. This one was small, 30 or so families, and probably better off than most, with looms in several houses and apple orchards nearby. Other nationalities lived here too. The village had prospered in recent years after starting to attract tourists. Annexes had been built to house them. A couple of dedicated guest houses had come up. The village was attractive to tourists because it was idyllic and cheap, and not least because it was within scoring distance of Malana, source of the region's best hashish. The thrice-born Leo smoked hashish the way others smoke cigarettes. He never went anywhere without a small stash, but even he had come here almost as a pilgrim, empty-handed, because otherwise it would be like, in his words, taking water to the sea. The locals who interacted with the tourists seemed at once ingratiating and contemptuous. The kids sang out their namastes a little too promptly. The guest house I stayed in had an outhouse cafe that sold macaroni, Nutella pancakes, bottled water, and toilet paper. The boy who ran it had a chronic ache in his arm, and the owner, who lived in an abutting house, told me this was because the boy ate off the same plates as foreigners. A short distance away, a married man who let out rooms built around and over his house had seen it fit to proposition an Australian woman staying with him. She had been bitten by the dog and was far more interested in her anti-rabies regime than in illicit romance. His daughter's birthday celebrations, held in his house, brought about a strange clash of worlds and intentions. The kids had their cake and streamers. The tourists could buy beer. Music played on a cassette player, and he ordered, in Hindi, the bemused women of his house to dance. The foreigners shuffled about too, pleased to participate in the local culture. A plate primed with 100-rupee notes lay on the table for those who had forgotten to bring a present. God arrived at our guest house one afternoon in a palanquin. The owner told me later that the gods in the temples nearby often went out visiting, making their itinerary manifest through ants carrying a morsel, wheeling and wobbling of the bearers. The visit meant that the owner had to perform a propitiation. First, the area had to be purified, and so the foreigners were flushed out of the rooms and herded into the outhouse, where they spent the next few hours passing a chillum around, delighted that India possessed the mystic depths they'd always suspected. The men of the village gathered round the courtyard for the ceremonial beheading of a goat. I was allowed to stay. You're Indian, after all, the owner said. But it was a dog's certification that mattered to me. My one encounter had ended ambiguously. I approached the dog, and it began to lope towards me with a businesslike manner. I lost my nerve and retreated without being chased. I was planning to test myself with more resolve when I visited the village next, but it was not to be. A couple of weeks later in Manali, I ran into a woman I'd met in the village, a European Buddhist with close-cropped hair. She sported a thick bandage around her right ankle. I asked about the dog. It had started proving bad for business, so one of the guest house owners had shot it. The daily injections seemed to have drained the woman of her loving kindness. She said, they should have killed it a long time ago.
Thanks, Srinath. There's so much. When I was reading that earlier today, and you said this is something that you wrote as part of your travel writing, and I was looking at it and saying, there's so much there, which is again coming back to why we're talking about form and why we're talking about genre, because it is, in a sense, yes, it could be, I was traveling and I'm writing this, but it's a short story, it's vignettes, it's so much, it's satire, it's picking up questions of identity, of Indianness, and it's political. So there's so much packed into that piece of writing that makes you laugh, which is just delightful, I think. So thank you for sharing that. Any questions?
So how is the memoir going, the one that you were writing? I'm just interested in knowing how you sort of shift, between these shorter pieces, which require a certain kind of energy and a certain kind of, I think, impetus, and something longer, like the memoir that you...
Yeah, what I was writing was actually fiction. It was a collection of connected short stories. I did finish it, and I decided that it had more value for me than for the world. So I've sort of left it there.
I was really interested in the way there was so much humor in that piece that you read, and that touched lightly on some very heavy questions for us. But then that very unexpected ending where, the smile is pretty much wiped off your face. And it strikes me that laughter and tears in life often exist within moments of each other. When you wrote that ending, which kind of went against the humor and the lightness of that piece, what was was it a way to slap the reader across the face?
No, sometimes I think of the ending of a piece as a kind of entry point, in the sense that it places in context what has been going on. So I think there are, many things in life that are heavy and that lie beneath the texture of our daily lives. And it's useful to be reminded of, I guess, the fact that these things exist in the background.
So we have about, say, there's a very helpful timer here. We have about, very large. So we have about 7 or 8 minutes to go. Any questions? Please keep them brief. Yeah, I see 2 there. Is that Shumit? Yeah, Shumit first.
So this is a question for all the panelists. If you dispense with the word genre, what will the poor academics do?
Nothing personal against academics, but the point is, academia is a parasite, and without the progenitors of art, which is the writers, academia would not exist. Thank you. Academics feed off what writers do and make a much better living often than the writers, always, a much more stable sort of living and than the writers. And I'm not saying this with any resentment, actually I am. But if academics find it difficult to place us in a label or pin us to the wall, to pin us to a wall of butterflies and make us one more butterfly pinned to the wall, I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry.
Are you saying that those who can't write teach?
I think you put it very well.
Would Srinath or Janice want to respond?
Yeah. I think it's all right. I mean, just because somebody puts some writers in a genre doesn't mean the writers have to take it seriously, or anyone else for that matter. These are creative experiments in their own right, perhaps, right?
There was one more question behind. Yes.
The question is to the person on the right. You just wrote on a small short piece, right? Prior to COVID, I was told that it's very difficult to publish short stories. You just said a short story. Even in the morning, there were quite a few people who were telling short stories, short pieces. Has things changed during the pandemic, or has it been always there?
I'm not sure. This was published pre-pandemic, so...
No, what I'm saying is, has post pandemic things changed that it's easier to publish short stories now?
I really wouldn't know. I mean,
I think that's a trend that sort of, predates the pandemic. I think, short stories were becoming and are. I don't know why this tussle exists. I think it's extremely classist in its roots, but we can go into that another time. I think that short story collections were being embraced and more acknowledged by the publishing industry even pre-pandemic. So I don't know.
Award-winning short stories and blah, 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 all in a collection. And
I don't know. If anything, the pandemic should have given more time to people. And maybe in some way, short stories need more time than novels because you need to enter a different world with every story sometimes. So.
Also, post-pandemic and post-social media, we all have ADHD to a certain extent. We're all scrolling. So I think publishers should feel much more generous towards short stories and short story writers because they might get more of a readership now. Who knows?
Sorry, we missed your question. Yeah.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Jeet, one of the poems that you read references a line from a poem in Gibran's The Prophet, "Your children are not your children." I was wondering what that particular text means to you. It's something that a lot of people end up reading when they're in college and then somehow don't end up reading anything else by Gibran. I was wondering how you feel about Gibran as a reader.
Thanks. He's one of those writers that you read when you're 16. Like, for example, Ayn Rand. You read Ayn Rand when you're 16. The difference between Gibran and Ayn Rand is when you grow up, you get very embarrassed that you read Ayn Rand. That's not the same with Khalil Gibran. You might be not as enthusiastic about saying that you've read him and read a lot of him, but I don't think he's anything to be ashamed of. Many of those lines still resonate. And I think his life story is always something interesting and even inspiring. So thanks for noticing that. It was deliberate.
Any last, we have like literally 2 minutes to go. So I can take one question. Do you want to fight it out or should I just go with the person in the white? If it's a short question, we can fit in two. Quickly.
Hello, sir. This is here.
Where? Oh,
Over
somebody else
here.
entirely. Okay.
Hello. Hello, everyone. This is Oyam. I have 2 questions.
One.
Okay, one. Okay, I will just come. Let me. First of all, do you select ideas based on the genres or modes, as you said, or vice versa? And the second is, in the hurly-burly of politics and the world, do you think about the legalities of writing while penning down your voices? Thank you.
Who wants to take that? Should I take it? Well, I'll take the first one because I think we've solved the thing of the chicken and egg genre before after thing through discussion, and there's no answer.
And we know that the egg came first.
We know that the egg came first, and what the egg is up for you. Is up to you individually to decide. The second question about legalities. You don't know. Use the mic.
No, because that still remains my answer because you're being honest to your story. And there is, hopefully, at the core of that, some craziness and some courage that goes into writing that story. And you want to see...
And an obsession to go back to Jeet's original
Yes,
work.
and you want to see that through, no matter what the consequences might be. You are being honest to your story. It's as simple as that.
Although I do believe that at this point in our lives, in this particular environment, there is an element of self-censorship that might creep into your work without even your knowledge or your permission, because we do live in a society that takes words very seriously and sometimes sees meanings in words that the writer may not have intended, and sometimes those words can lead to riots and murders and violence, and
Sometimes you may not even say anything and still be jailed for your silence, because in that silence lies apparently the plot. Yes.
If I can quickly add, I think
so you can't ever win. So
last
you
word
just
from Srinath, and then we have to.
Dead if you do and dead if you don't.
Yeah, but I also think that contracts have changed over the last decade or so, where I think more of an onus is being put on the writer. So it's possible that it will have some sort of, an inhibitory effect on writers at some point. I don't know, but we'll soldier on, I suppose. Yeah.
On that note, thank you, Janice, Jeet, Srinath. Thank you, AKLF, and thank you all of you. And the conversation continues. Thank you so much.